Hello, in this video we'll be going over the ACORNS 2019-2020 application for our request for proposal. We are in the RFP package. On page 12 is where the application begins. The application is in PDF format. Word versions of all of the application materials are available upon request. So this is the application. This is one of the pieces which is required as part of your proposal, submitting your proposal. The first page is pretty straightforward. You're listing your contact information, who is the official contact. So this would be who is going to be signing your subcontract and who is ultimately liable for meeting the requirements of that subcontract. In addition, we're requiring that you insert a project lead. This is the person that's responsible for carrying out the day-to-day project activities and requirements and who will be receiving most of the communications from the ACORNS team throughout the project. Identifying project staff is part of the requirement, so please make sure you are putting somebody in there that will be responsible for carrying out the proposed project activities. The next section is indicating which tier you're applying for. If you are applying for more than one tier, you must submit separate applications for that. But you can only apply for one tier at a time. You would select your tier here and also list your funding amount request. This first piece of the application requirement is your problem statement. This says, using data, describe the need for funding to address chronic diseases in your community. Identify your project focus area, which can be heart disease, stroke, obesity, commercial tobacco use, and diabetes, and provide a rationale for that selection. So in this statement, you should be using data from your community, from your tribal health program, from previous community health assessments, from the California Tribal Epidemiology Center, CTEC, which is housed within CRIB, to get information or data that supports the need to have a chronic disease prevention program in your community. Additionally, you will need to identify which your main project focus areas will be for this year and provide a rationale for that selection. I know that there's several of you that have SDPI grants or tobacco grants or different things like that. So either using some information from those applications to support the need, or also using them as a reason why you're selecting a different topic area because you already have funding to support those project activities. So this is a really important piece of the application. Please make sure you give yourself plenty of time to complete that and include data that supports the need for funding to address chronic disease in your community. And data does not always have to be numbers. It can be anecdotal, it can be qualitative data, but there needs to be some rationale to describe why is it that your community or your tribal health program or your tribe has a need for this kind of funding. The second question in the application is describe how you will address this focus area through policy, systems, environmental, or clinical community linkage strategies. And please include how you will complete the project requirements outlined on page 6 of the RFP for the tier that you're applying for. So if you watch the RFP video, you will remember that some of the two main strategies that we're wanting people to use are focused in policy changes, systems changes, environmental changes, or to implement clinical community linkages. There's information at the top of the RFP about these. If you are unfamiliar, please do a quick Google search about what that might mean. You may also reach out to project staff to gain clarity on what that might mean. So you will use whatever focus area you decided on, which is heart disease, stroke, obesity, commercial tobacco use, or diabetes, and then describe how you will use PSE or CCL strategies to address that. Additionally, in the RFP on page 6, there are project requirements that are listed for each tier. In this response, this will be a narrative So you'll be writing sort of paragraph style how you plan on completing those required projects, whether that be which staff you've identified to do that and how you're planning on incorporating that into your project work, or what some of those proposed activities will be that you will use. So this is the narrative piece, and it will sort of match what your work plan might look like, but this is a, instead of being in a template, this is a more free-form description. So sometimes the work plans can be limited about how much information you can put in there. So any extra or additional information you think is necessary for us to understand your project proposal, this is the spot that you would put that in. The next section of your application will be your work plan template. We will have a separate video on completing the work plan template. Section C discusses your organizational capacity. Organizational capacity just means, is your organization, whether that be your tribe or your department or the clinic, do they have the ability to actually complete the project activities you're proposing? And if so, this is your section to demonstrate that to us or explain that to us. So this first question talks about day-to-day responsibility, and that includes the staff that will be completing this. So who will have day-to-day responsibility for key tasks, such as leadership of the project, monitoring of the project's ongoing progress, preparation of reports, program evaluation, financial tracking, and management. So this is the one about talking about your project staff. Who's going to be involved? Who do you have on board? Who is going to be responsible for completing the things that you're proposing? And maybe it's one person. Ideally, it's more than one person, and there is somewhat of a team approach to this. But ultimately, there will likely be at least one project lead assigned to this. So if it's different people identifying who they are, what their experience is perhaps in that role, and why they're qualified to do those tasks. The second here is effective PSC or CCL strategies require a team approach and support from organizational leadership. Describe any additional staff, including leadership, who will be supporting this project. Describe their roles, level of involvement, and how they will be engaged throughout the project. So this is something that we are really trying to focus on for this application period. Too often we see one person carrying multiple grants, trying to complete multiple work plans, and ends up being a little bit overworked and stretched thin. So in an effort to avoid that, we understand that it's important that multiple people are engaged on a project. That doesn't necessarily mean they're financially engaged, but perhaps they have identified that they support that, or that they will agree to include a couple of things in their scope. So this is an opportunity to demonstrate and discuss and share with us who else is going to be supporting this project, how will they be involved and engaged. You can kind of think about this as like the purpose of a letter of support. So they're not necessarily doing your project, but they're supporting your project in maybe A, B, and C ways, or that they've described that they're going to be supporting that. So help us understand who's going to be involved and how you're going to be successful in that team approach. The next one is describe your organization's experience in grants management and implementing PSE and CCL strategies to prevent and manage chronic disease. What challenges or barriers do you anticipate in implementing this project? How will you overcome the anticipated challenges of your proposed project? So again, as somebody who's administering public funds, we want to understand what your experience is with managing grants and also completing PSE or CCL strategies, particularly in preventing chronic disease. If you are new to this, that is fine, but you are able to maybe demonstrate that you've implemented other grants. Perhaps you've previously implemented ACORNS. And with that, we want you to think about what challenges or barriers do you anticipate. As people that are distributing funds, we understand that projects don't always go as planned, but a project that can anticipate things that might go wrong early on have a better chance of being successful because you're being realistic about actually implementing it. Our goal here is to have people be successful and implement sustainable, impactful projects. So discuss with us about what some of those challenges and barriers are, and then also, what is your attempt to overcome those? Sometimes it's a good check and balance if you realize there are a lot of challenges and barriers that might prevent you from being successful, and you don't have really a solution to those problems or those barriers. Maybe that's an opportunity to reevaluate your approach so that you can go into the project being more successful or with a greater chance of success. So if you have barriers you cannot overcome, maybe that's an opportunity to call ACORNS staff and talk about how we might rewrite or readjust that proposal so that you can be more successful. Sometimes people will write projects that are highly dependent on outside organizations or outside individuals, and when those people don't show up, then that really compromises the success of the project. So really thinking about those types of challenges and figuring out how you make sure your program is designed in a way that will be successful or that can overcome those challenges. And this is your opportunity to describe that here. Or potentially describing how you have overcome previous challenges and why that makes you able to overcome those challenges in this project. And then finally, with organizational capacity, describe how your organization will incorporate culturally adapted approaches and values to most effectively meet the outcomes of this project. This project and the funding is specifically coming from CDC in order to improve and impact tribal communities. There is a large focus on having the strategies and the activities that are implemented done so in a culturally tailored way, done so in a way that truly meets the needs of your community members. So discussing how you're going to, and we know that incorporating culture is a protective factor, that there are traditional ways of healing and wellness, health and wellness. And so discussing how your organization will make sure to consider and to incorporate culturally adapted approaches and values to your project. The next section of the application is your evaluation methods. This is where you will complete the evaluation form, and we will have another video that describes how to fill that form out. The final piece of this application is the budget. You can use this budget template, or you can provide your own budget template if that's preferred. However, it needs to include a minimum amount of these categories. And definitely include a narrative. So this is where you're going to incorporate your staff, the fringe benefits to that, any supplies that are required for your project, any required travel. Are you going to be using consultants or contractors? Are you going to be, and then what are some of your other costs? Please make sure your narrative is detailed. That includes doing price breakdowns or estimates of supplies or the number of travels and potentially and who will be traveling or who the consultant is and what you're going to be consulting them on or how they're going to be providing support. We need to understand that your budget and your work plan activities are in line. Please also make sure that the math is correct on this. Check and double check that you're doing this thoroughly and appropriately. And then the final piece of this application is that it needs to be signed by the authorized signature. So that's going to be the person who is listed at the very first page as the official contact. That's typically a CEO, a chairperson, a tribal administrator, or an executive director, whoever is responsible for the subcontracts that your organization holds. So that's who will need to date and sign and what their title is. So that is the full application. Again, for the budget piece, there's an allowable cost over here on the left. I just clicked this link. There's an allowable cost example. So for your staff, for your travel, supplies, trainings, and meetings. So there's some examples of ways that you can spend your funding that fall in line with the project goals and requirements. If you have any questions about how you want to use your funds or what's allowable or not, please double check with CRIB staff and ensure that what you're proposing is allowable, and or to get some brainstorm ideas of different ways to use your funding. So that concludes this video on filling out the ACORNS application. Again, there's Word documents available of this if you would prefer that over a fillable PDF. And finally, as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to CRIB staff, myself, Geneva Sorensen, and we are happy to provide you support and guidance for filling out your application successfully. Thank you.